for me, the biggest difference between Facebook and Twitter is on Facebook, you basically get to create your own gated community. You get to figure out who lives in your neighborhood, whose information you're going to see every day, and who you want to interact with. But it's really a gated community where you're the real estate developer, and the mayor trying to figure out who's living with you. Twitter is the street. And the fact is that you really have no say in who's going to hear what you have to say. You have no say in who reacts to what you have to say. But it's much more open in that sense. You have an opportunity to have your voice amplified by random strangers. I mean, some of the magic with Twitter is remarkable. I could tell you that last week, I think Twitter themselves posted the 10 most influential tweets of the year. And what was remarkable was the number one tweet I actually had a story about. So, when the earthquake happened in Haiti back in January, IDF sent people to, we had 280 people from IDF were on the ground in Haiti, and one of my friends actually, 10 days after the earthquake, was sent on his commander was in Tel Aviv, doing a live mashup between Google Maps and Twitter to validate where tweets were coming from. And some journalist actually identified a person in a bodega, we used to be a bodega, who was screaming. And actually, by a series of tweets, the IDF came in and saved the person's life, which I thought was very cool. In fact, apparently the guy was screaming, leave me alone, because he was inside of the liquor side of the bodega for 10 days. All he had was alcohol. And but he was feeling no pain. And
this is a true story.
It was funny. But earlier that week, my friend Ann Curry, who's a journalist for NBC News, and she was actually voted number one most influential tweet of the year. She tweeted out, because when she got to Haiti a few days after the earthquake, the U.S. Air Force took control of the runway, the landing strip, and Doctors Without Borders had cargo planes with doctors and supplies trying to land, and they couldn't get the attention of the U.S. Air Force to land their plane. So Ann Curry basically put out a tweet that said, at U.S. Air Force, please, let Doctors Without Borders at MSF _USA land their plane. And apparently that generated a roar of tweets. I happened to have been online at that very second. I saw it happen. But before I retweeted it, I actually Googled who Doctors Without Borders was. I saw the press release and I saw their frustration. And my background happens to be a ham radio operator. And in times of crisis, I was somebody who would always look to relay messages from one place to another, trying to help even just a little bit. And so when I saw this tweet from Ann Curry, I felt, if you're on Twitter, retweeting is just something you do, right? Just if you see someone makes a statement, it resonates with you, you repeat it. So I repeated, I restated at U.S. Air Force, please let Doctors Without Borders land their plane. To my utter amazement, about a minute after I tweeted it, I got a tweet that says, at U.S. Air Force, at Jeff Pulver, we're on it. Now, okay, there's an international crisis going on. I'm in New York. Somebody who's at U.S. Air Force is listening to me at that very moment, telling me that they're on this. And it's like, okay. And an hour later, I got a tweet from at U.S. Air Force that the plane had landed. So I wrote back to them, thank you for telling me. Then, on Twitter, it's like, you never know who's following you. But 2 days later, I noticed at U.S. Air Force is following me. And they were following 26 other people. The White House, Southern Command, at U.S. Army, and me. So when you can follow somebody on Twitter, what do? Sometimes you send them a direct message. So I sent at U.S. Air Force a direct message of saying hello, and I found out that in the U.S. Pentagon, there was a 6-person Twitter team for the Air Force. And I was trying to figure out, okay, next time I need help, do I do at U.S. Air Force? I need an airlift, please. And it's like, whoa. And so it was just incredible to see that, because that sort of brought home what Twitter to me was all about compared to Facebook. Like, around the world, Facebook has done phenomenal and it's created a great economy. But at the end of the day, it's the way that you communicate that seems to matter the most, sometimes, at least for some people. And on Twitter, it's that randomness of your voice being amplified that has created a back channel, which has sort of changed the way businesses operate. Whether you're in marketing, whether you're in branding, whether you're a charity, not-for-profit, NGO, whether you're music or someplace else, the era of Twitter has basically brought on an opportunity for your voice to be heard and your voice to matter. And there are companies that are starting to realize that they have to listen to what other people are saying. And so if you're a company big enough to have a chief marketing officer, you probably need to consider having a chief listening officer. And being able to listen isn't just for brands anymore, but apparently it's for governments. And so when IDF in Haiti found kids in need of medical help, they basically put out tweets about it, and miraculously people found doctors. IDF was actually listening to Twitter to rescue people. And when the U.S. Air Force is sitting there listening and talking back, it's like, this is a different world. Because, at 9/11 in New York City, which I'm a survivor because I got fired from, the biggest issue they had in New York on that day was the fact that every organization that was trying to help each other couldn't talk to each other. It wasn't like they weren't even planning. Forget about strategy stuff. I'm talking about physically. The police department's radio didn't talk to the fire department's radio, didn't talk to the ambulance workers' radio, didn't talk to the FBI's radio. No one had homogenized communications. It was a world where everything was fragmented. And it took many years in New York City to actually homogenize that. But for this one day or this one moment in time where the world was listening on the same frequency, it happened to have been Twitter. And I think that sort of set the stage for how things will evolve in the future. And so Twitter may not matter to you as an individual because you can't figure out why people tweet, why they're sharing information, why it's relevant. But it is relevant under certain circumstances and maybe very relevant for you, and you may not know it. Because if you have a chance to be there, you're living in a time now where if you're a company, you're no longer just a logo. You're no longer just a press statement. You're a person. And there's been this humanization that's taken place where your companies have come alive. And of course, if you work for Disney, you've walked around as a mascot, you're Goofy or Mickey Mouse, that's one way of taking a logo alive. But now, anyone here represent brands on Twitter here in Israel? Some of you? So I can't see you, but you don't have to be shy, a few of you, right? So when you're tweeting on behalf of the company or behalf of the brand, and people may like you or not like you, not based on who you are, but based on what you represent. And that's something which happens more and more in terms of this whole, so we're going through this whole rebirth of humanity, I believe. And it's the Dalai Lama actually I think said it best. But after what happened in Haiti, he said that in the 20th, when he asked about the future of humanity, he said in the 21st century he feels really good about things, much better than he ever did in the 20th century, because he never saw such an outpouring of love and support like he saw what happened in Haiti. And while I don't wish disasters on anybody, it did show me that the world is getting better. And 100 years ago, modern artists actually didn't have human beings in the art because some of the modern artists felt humanity was dead. I would argue that it's the use of these technologies that are actually bringing people closer and actually giving everybody a voice. And so what I ended up doing with my ability to reach out to the U.S. Air Force, I haven't asked for any lifts yet, but in April this past year, I did a conference in New York City, the 140 conference, and I had a panel where I had Ann Curry came from NBC News. I had a friend of mine from Haiti, he came, one of Wycliffe Jean's interns, he came. And IDF was there, flew in from Tel Aviv, and at U.S. Air Force was there. And we had, during the 2-day conference, we had a half-hour conversation about the effects of the real-time web on emergency communications. And I think the world's changed forever in terms of how we can connect, and that when in times of trouble, people can listen, and they're there to help. And it's just a pretty amazing place. And